trying to follow European models, the Westminster model of so-called democracy.
Well, what sort of model do you have in mind?
I think, well, don't you think that we had civilization before we encountered Europeans?
That's not relevant to how are you going to run a country now?
Yes, look, actually it is. Because,
do you want to grow the standard of living?
Yes, we do, but we don't need to be constantly under European tutelage.
Okay, what is your model then? What is your model?
Our model is actually going, and actually Africa, but Io made a point that he doesn't feel things are changing. Things are changing in Africa. Africans are coming together, not only African states as they currently exist, but also African civil society. Pan-Africanism is part of that agenda. The unification in terms of evolving the African Union into a United States of Africa is part of that agenda. So let's not deny that this is happening. What would be the way forward? We have indigenous models. We have indigenous knowledge system. We have indigenous models of governance. And if we're talking about democracy, we founded that in Africa. So let's have some recognition and respect in terms of this conversation.
All right, deal with the question for me, will you, Io, about wars in Africa. Now, these are not African states cooperating. They're African states. They're Africans killing other Africans, sometimes states, sometimes not states. Now, they may be fueled to some extent by the West, but often they're pretty indigenous. How does that fuel what you were talking about, African unity and growth of an African identity?
Well, with wars, naturally, they affect everyone in the country, more so women and children. But I think most of them that we've seen across Africa can become tribally led. Again, we've seen in Rwanda where one ethnic group tried to exterminate another. We've seen in Sierra Leone where brother turned against brother, especially that with rebels and hacking of people's limbs and arms. We've seen the worst kind of wars across Africa. I think what it shows is a couple of things. It shows that these states, be it Sierra Leone, Liberia, Congo, are fragile states by nature. And my personal concern is that for us to look at improving these states, if you take away, like we've spoken about, aid, if you do not inject the right sort of investment in these countries, then the conditionality that led to these countries being in the position that they find themselves, this level of fragility, will become far more apparent.
Do you buy Esther Stanford's argument that actually the state is the problem, or do you think that if you destroyed the states you'd get anarchy?
It's a combination of the two. You know, the chicken and the egg situation. I think it's one of the two. The state is to blame. The society is also to blame, because the people who run the state are from the society, and I think societies have to look at themselves to see what has gone wrong fundamentally. But more so from outsiders, those who are looking from the outside, those who are perpetuating, fueling wars, selling arms. Everyone's to blame, really.
Okay, High Commissioner, are African states becoming stronger? Are African rulers becoming more benevolent?
I think African states are becoming stronger because there's an onward development of the democratic idea, and the old dictators are dying off, and the new ones are learning from the examples of those who have advanced and accepted the tenets of democracy.
There don't seem to be quite as many fabulously bad dictators as there were. There's the kind who keep human limbs in the presidential palace. There seem to be that kind does seem to have gone, right?
Well, yes, they have gone with the deeds that they performed. So, and others are dying off naturally. So.
Okay, let's go to another question. Zahid Qureshi, you have a question? Yeah.
I would like to ask the panel. Can the solution to the African problems be found through aid, or if we are going through, giving them more resources for other things? Is it aid?
Aid or trade, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a key question. I'm going to put this one to Io Johnson first.
Yes. The aid model hasn't worked. If you think about it, you don't need to become a genius to look at these figures. In the 1960s and 70s, we had about 10% of the population living below the poverty line. Now, in 2000, up until 2009, where we are now, we've got nearly between 60 and 80% of the populations of Africa living below the poverty line. So you can actually see that clearly. If you've been injecting aid into this equation all this time, it hasn't worked. You don't need to be a genius to identify that. The problem you have is that what would be the alternative If you take away the aid model from Africa, Africa has become totally dependent on it. Governments can't operate without it. These governments will literally disintegrate. They will crumble and die. And we can't have anarchy. So I think a stage-managed exit is the best way, which we've spoken about earlier. But also, African countries have got to be able to have the capacity to raise private capital.
Are African countries fairly traded with? Are they? Is the rest of the world treating them fairly in terms of their, integration with the rest of the world?
Yes, I will touch on that. But the ability to raise private capital is one whereby you get money elsewhere, and if African governments do that, they will be able to improve their lives and move away from the aid model. But in terms of trade, clearly African products need to get to Western markets. They're not being allowed to do so. In return, the developed nations are subsidizing their farmers. Their products, they can overproduce their products.
The average American cow gets more of a subsidy than the average African.
Absolutely. So that means that unit cost of production is that much lower. And because if you've been able to produce so much more, you can't sell them in your own market. They dump them in the African markets. And the local products have no chance. So yes, Africa needs to be able to trade. They need to be able to offer that to all African countries, and it's not happening at the moment.
Very quick audience question before I go to the next panelist. Is it on trade and aid?
It's just directed at the High Commissioner of Ghana. I'm just wondering, High Commissioner, you've been in a country that, for 50 years has had independence from Britain, and you're using a governance that you've adopted from Britain successfully. The lady made a comment before about other possible forms of governance that are African. What were your opinions on the lady's comment?
Good question. Answer it briefly. I mean, British-style government, colonial government has sort of worked for you,
I think she's right. There are certain aspects of governance in our traditional systems which encompass, general accession or general acceptance of contributions from the generality of the public, which is very democratic. And we need to find a way of combining that one with some of the tenets that we've learned from the West. It will enhance our democracy. It will be a special bread, but it will enhance our democracy. But we are all generally included in the general trend of civilization. Therefore, we cannot move away completely from the Western type of democracy.
All right, Esther Stanford, back to trade and aid. I take it you think that choice is a false choice, really, because they're both forms of Western power, right?
Well, I mean, I'm going to pick up on the point that was made. I think we need to be having much more inter-African trade. And we also need to look at, Western markets paying a fair price for African raw goods and commodities. If we look at how much Africa and African countries actually benefit from what is being extracted from various transnational corporations, I think we find it's minuscule in percentage terms. So we need a fundamental redistribution of the power in terms of the international trade system, and this is already underway. That process of reparations is already underway.
Okay, Lord Lee, last comment with you, I think. I mean, one of the other factors in this, one of the other potential motives for Obama's speech was the growing influence of China in Africa, and they are piling in a perhaps slightly neo-colonial way. Do you think, firstly, that is something that lay behind Obama's motivation, and is that the new aid, or is it the new colonialism?
Well, I think Obama's concern about China is a legitimate one. After all, taxpayers in our country and all around the industrial countries are writing off debt.
Yeah.
At the same time, this allows
Is that
them
a potential
to...
model for us?
No, well, just to make me point about where it
slightly
connects
running
with
out
China.
of time, I'm afraid.
Well,
Got to hurry on this.
the Chinese are then able to lend a lot more money with strings attached. Don't be any doubts about that on mineral development and so on. And so there are concerns from our taxpayers' point of view that the Chinese are saying to Africa, you can do whatever you like, human rights aren't our big concern, and so on. And I do think that's a legitimate question for us to be discussing.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. That, I'm afraid, is all we've got time for. Although, once again, if you'd like to be part of the audience here in London for future